What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. My friends call me Klau. I'm a product manager working out of Silicon Valley, albeit remotely for now. Former Uber APM and Kleiner Perkins product fellow. New grad recruiting season is just around the corner now. So today we're going to talk about 4 different ways you can break into your first product management role, some of the pros and cons of each of the different approaches, and some tactical tips for how to go about each of them. But first, a quick disclaimer. Getting your first product management job, I know this from experience, is extremely difficult, especially as a new grad. For most product managers, becoming a product manager is like their second or third career. That means they've had like 2 to 8 years of experience doing 1 to 2 other jobs already before they became a PM. So being able to start at, 22 with no prior full-time job experience is already pretty nuts. Tack on the fact that companies normally hire 1 PM for every 10 engineers they hire, you can see pretty quick how the odds are stacked against you. So that's to say, this video is not like I'll show you the pros and cons of 4 different ways and so you can choose the best one for you. It's more like getting a PM job is hard, here are 4 ways to do it. You should do all of them as much as you can with your available bandwidth. And with that, let's get right into it. Starting with APM Programs. Now, I might be a little biased as I started my career through an APM program, but if you're new to product management, getting into an associate product management program is the best way to kickstart and accelerate your product management career. There is definitely good reason for the hype train. Different companies have different names for them, but they're all essentially designed to take someone who has no previous product management experience and within the course of 1 to 2 years, train them into someone who's a super capable PM. Seems good. Most of these programs will focus on new grads, but some will also take experienced hires. Please apply to all of the ones you're eligible for. Process-wise, this is pretty straightforward. You just apply online, ideally get a referral, and then just follow all the typical PM interview tips and tricks that I talk about in all my other videos. So what are the benefits of APM programs? Well, it has everything to do with how they're structured. Generally, APM programs consist of 2 to 3 rotations done on different teams across a span of 1.5 to 2 years. This is intended to get you a lot of work experience working across different types of products and different orgs at different parts of the company. Point being, you get to see a lot of examples of how different teams and different product managers approach their job of product management very quickly. Normally, it would take you maybe 2 or 3 different jobs, each of which would probably be 1 to 2 years each, so maybe 5 to 6 years before you got that breadth of experience. APM programs generally also consist of a class or a cohort of like-minded peers in a similar stage of their career as you, so you can essentially grow and learn faster together. Seems good. Multiple cohorts and classes over a period of years forms the general APM community at a given company and is a support system and network that is going to be invaluable to you while you're at the company and as people graduate onto different roles. You'll be able to lean on them as everyone goes off to do bigger and better things. APM programs generally also give you access to a formal mentorship system, which will pair you with a senior PM or company leadership or sometimes even an executive coach to give you tactical feedback, career advice to just accelerate your growth as a PM. At Uber, every APM is assigned a buddy from the class above, as well as a director or group product manager level mentor to have regular conversations with about personal and professional growth. So all these things sound pretty awesome, but it's also worth noting that none of them are required or necessary prerequisites. They're not even actually that unique. Like all of these components you could actually make and structure for yourself. The main benefit of the APM program is that you get all of these supporting features or functions for free. If you don't end up going the APM route, still consider recreating all of these 3 elements as a support system around you to help you accelerate your career growth as a product manager. On to the downsides. The first most obvious one being APM programs are notoriously competitive. To give you some color, every year, Uber's APM program gets, upwards of 2,000 or 3,000 applications, and there's like 10 spots. So you do the math, that is not a very high selection number, acceptance rate. So yes, I would suggest applying for any and all APM programs that you can, but also have plan B. The other thing to realize is that APM programs generally take 1.5 to 2 years. And during that time, you're mainly going to be focusing on breadth. You're going to go through 3 different teams across 6-month rotations. And what you sacrifice here is depth and not having specialized at all in any specific area. Typically, this will mean that you won't own as large of a product area as fast, and that can limit how fast you get promoted if that's something you care about within the first couple years out of the program. The next way to break into a product manager role straight out of college is to actually apply for PM roles that accept new grads. There are very few of these, but they do exist. Here are some of the more commonly known companies that hire new grad PMs. And the pros for this is straightforward. You get to be a PM straight out of college, and you get to focus on one specific area right out of the bat, which means you're better set up for promotions and owning larger scope way earlier in your career as you specialize and become a product domain expert. The downsides of this is you don't really get to explore. So you better hope that that first role that you get landed into is a good one and that you like that team. Otherwise, you might be locked in, or you'll have to switch teams, which can generally take 6 to 12 months, which then again kind of stunts the benefits of having gone straight in the first place. And again, the other downside is that there's not that many companies that are willing to take that kind of a bet on a new grad PM. So again, highly competitive, and supply and demand is once again not really in your favor. Also, because these roles are just straight up full-time PM roles, typically they have less structure and programs in place around them. So it'll be on you to create those mentorship networks and support systems that'll help you grow as a PM faster. The third way is product management fellowships. These fellowships are typically offered by venture capital firms or third-party organizations in partnership with other companies, typically startups, that are too small to have a formal recruiting pipeline for product management, but could potentially use the product help. There aren't too many of these, but the two obvious ones that come to mind are Kleiner Perkins, the fellowship that I was part of. And if you're Canadian, there's a program called APM Canada that you should look into, formerly APM Toronto. At some point this year, they decided to go nationwide. Kleiner Perkins Product Management Fellowship Program is a year-long program for full-time product managers that are working at one of their portfolio companies as a product manager. And the APM Canada program is a roughly 6-month program for up-and-coming PMs in Canada. Very unique, given that Canada doesn't really have a company big enough to have a formally structured APM program yet. Shopify being the exception here. I think they launched their APM program, which they call the Apprentice Product Manager Program, about a month or two ago, I think. The way that these fellowships work is that the startup that hires you, that's where you're actually going to do the product management work. But on the side, the venture capital firm or the third-party organization will provide networking opportunities and a community and give you access to industry professionals to network and grow your career. And in practice, you'll likely need to pass 2 sets of interviews, one with the company and one with the venture capital firm. I'd say the biggest pro of these programs is that it gives you a lot of exposure to a lot of investors and tech executives in your kind of local community, which is super helpful if you're interested in entrepreneurship. Another benefit of these fellowships is that you can sometimes use it as a aggregated job application. For example, with Kleiner Perkins, there's roughly maybe 5 to 10 different companies that are participating in the product fellowship, and there's a single application that you need to fill out, and the firm will take care of distributing your application to all these companies. Cons, I'd call out 2 main ones. One is limited spots, and 2 is your experience and value add out of these programs is going to depend heavily on who is part of your cohort. A big part of the value add here is network and community, and if the vibe isn't great between you and the other people, it's not going to be a great experience. This extends across the board, so who you end up working for at the specific company that hires you, the specific executives or investors or company leaders that get brought in through the program, also going to vary a lot. So it's kind of a roll of the dice. If you apply for these fellowships, I would advise thinking about it in terms of I am working for a specific company and the fellowship is just like the cherry on top, because the main benefit for your career is going to come from what company you work for and who you work for at that company. So despite all the fanfare around the fellowship program, I would still focus entirely on would I be happy and am I excited about working for this specific portfolio company? And then consider the fellowship as a nice to have on the side. Process-wise, there's nothing too crazy. These fellowship programs tend to have a annual or every 6-month recruiting cadence. So just keep an eye out, do some research, find out when those times are and make sure you don't miss them. And the usual things kind of apply. It's better if you have a referral, reach out to people on LinkedIn who are alumni to get their thoughts, advice, and opinions, the usual stuff. And the last, but definitely not least route to consider is working as a PM at a startup. For the purposes of this video, we can consider a startup any company with less than 10 PMs. So the pros here are startups will give you a very unique opportunity to take on an extremely large scope of ownership very, very early on in your career, mostly capitalizing on the fact that early startups tend to be heavily understaffed. This means that your potential for impact is huge by default, and both the breadth and depth of your scope is a given. One success story that illustrates this pretty clearly is the career story of Linda Zhang, who was one of the very early PMs, I think the second PM at this rocket ship called Fair. She joined the company when it was extremely small, transitioned to product management in that role. She only previously had consulting experience before this, and within 2 years became a group product manager that was, had not only shipped hundreds of features and products, but also was managing a small group of PMs. This is 2 years, from 0 years of experience to 2 years of experience. Pretty crazy stuff. This is the kind of meteoric career trajectory that you can see at these high growth rocket ship startups. But as startups go, it's a high risk, high reward game since 99% of startups fail. If you want this type of meteoric career trajectory, I have 3 key takeaways for you. One is you have to find a rocket ship. You need to find a company that has the potential to grow at an extremely, extremely fast rate. Second, you need to be a very early employee at this company. Think like at least one of the first 50. And the third is you need to find an environment, a startup environment where you are set up for success. Typically, this comes in the form of someone at the company having a lot of product management experience already that you can lean on as a mentor. Because the predicate, even if you get the first 2, if you are not able to actually yourself, in terms of skills and competence, scale with the company's growth, what's gonna happen is they're just gonna hire someone to be your boss as opposed to you being the boss. So you need to be set up for success and have a lot of faith in your ability to grow into the role as fast as the company is growing. Now, how do you get this PM job at this hypothetical rocket ship startup? Well, the tricky part here is most PM roles at these early stage companies are not going to be advertised. And if they are advertised, they're probably going to be looking for someone with extensive experience already. So the way that you can kind of slip in early is you need to create your own job. There's 2 ways to do this. The first is to go into the company in a different role and then way out of focus. Okay. There's 2 ways to do this. The first is to just go into the company in a different role and then do an internal transfer at some point, because inevitably the company, if it doesn't have a PM yet, will start to need PM as a function eventually. So just wait for your chance, express your interest, and then go for it. The second, more interesting and creative way is to actually just create your own job, which is kind of only a possibility at these small companies where access to key decision makers, probably the CEO, is still kind of plausible. You can send them an email and with a relatively high confidence bar, you'll actually get them to read it and maybe even get a response. As opposed to, imagine sending an email to Zuckerberg asking for a job at Facebook. There's no chance that email gets read. There are 2 ways to make this happen. The first is somebody through your own network. You get a warm introduction by someone that also knows the CEO of some company. That's the ideal path. The second is you just gotta hustle if you don't know the people. You gotta cold reach out, go on LinkedIn, do some research, find their email, DM them on Twitter, something like that. Point is get their attention and get them, either ideally in a face-to-face meeting or a phone call or a Zoom call, but sometimes even just email or the actual text message will work too. Point is you need to have a very upfront, candid conversation with them about a few things. Why you're interested in the company, how you're going to be able to add value in terms of, 2 or 3xing their revenue or their velocity, what you're passionate about and how that passion aligns well with the company vision, why you're interested in the company to begin with. All that is to say, you need to make the decision maker, probably the CEO, feel your value proposition for the company. They need to understand what you can bring to the table. You need to understand what you can bring to the table and then convince them. These tactics in theory are pretty universal. They're pretty much the same tactics that I talked about in my video about how to write a good resume. There's a section in there where I talk about how to write a good cover letter. Pretty much the same principles. But again, these only work when you're able to talk to a decision maker. In this case, we're capitalizing on the fact that it's easier to get access to the CEO of smaller companies. Okay, and now your next question is, which CEOs should I contact? Which companies should I be looking at? And the nature of startups is that they're constantly failing and pivoting and changing. So it's like impossible to maintain an accurate list of all the startups that are potentially hiring PMs at any given point in time. So you got to do your own homework. A good way to think about this is venture capital firms. It's their job to find the rocket ships and the unicorns. So pay attention to where the funding is going, what companies have raised recently from some of the top venture capital firms. Here are some websites that'll help you out with that. Y Combinator. If you haven't heard of Y Combinator, it's probably the most famous and prestigious startup incubator in the world, based out of Silicon Valley. Every year, I think they run 2 programs per year where they literally just intake and incubate like 100 to 200 companies now, I think, per batch. After every cohort of the program, there's this thing called Demo Day, where these companies essentially graduate from the program and pitch to a ton of investors. This event gets a lot of coverage on tech publications like TechCrunch, so keep an eye out for those coming out every, like 6 to 8 months or something. The breakout list is a list of rocket ship companies that's curated every year by some folks down here in the Valley as well. AngelList is an online platform where startups regularly post job opportunities. And just keep an eye out on tech publications like TechCrunch or The Information, who generally will cover stories where startups raise significant amounts of capital, which, is a potential sign for a rocket ship. The one caveat I would highlight in closing about working at these high-growth startups is that you shouldn't expect a ton of hand-holding or just resources in general to help mentor you or bring you up in your career. You're gonna have to hit the ground running and deliver results in spite of all of that. And the other side of having a large scope of ownership is that your failures will also have extremely large effects on the business. So while there's potential upside in saying, I was able to start this new business line and deliver 100x revenue, the inverse is also true. Like if you are responsible for a big product launch and it fails, you could potentially kill the company. Just putting it out there. Also, because startups are so volatile and inconsistent by definition, your experience there is going to vary quite a bit depending on the culture of the company, the people you work with, the size and the space of the company. So it's all going to be very individualized. You can't really compare 2 startups directly. I'm using startups generally as an umbrella term, but that's not really how it's going to play out in practice. It's going to be very individualized. And cool, that brings us to the end of the video. I know from experience that recruiting as a new grad into product management is an extremely stressful and tumultuous time. So sincerely wishing you all the best as we go into recruiting season, which generally starts around mid to late June, early August. So very shortly after this. Hopefully this video and some of the other videos on my channel are able to help you in that pursuit of that first PM job. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a like, comment down below if there's anything else top of mind or any other questions you'd like me to answer going into the recruiting season. And as always, don't forget to click the subscribe button and click that bell icon to get a notification as I continue to make more videos about product management career and tips and advice in general. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got something out of it. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again soon.